last night I sat transfixed for 3 hours in front of the TV, which is unusual for me. This was last evening. There was a Fareed Zakaria special about how, in part, about how Hitler rose to power in Germany, and how basically it was the conservative elites who went along with him thinking they could control him and loving the fact that he had so much public adoration and adulation that they could, get the public on their side and they could win against the liberals, and they wanted to keep the socialists out of power, and they were willing to have Adolf Hitler, if that's what it took, to keep socialists out of power or lefties out of power. And first, Hindenburg said, we can work with him, and then von Papen, who essentially, the two of them basically made Hitler chancellor, bragged a couple of weeks later that we own him now. Right. It didn't work out so well, shall we say. And then there was this 2-hour special that was narrated by Jake Tapper that laid out the fact that, and this is, I think, becoming very slowly and around the edges, a dawning realization for Americans, that January 6th was not the coup attempt. It was not the insurrection attempt. I mean, it was those things, but it wasn't the thing. It was a pimple on the butt of those things. It was the terrible metaphor, but it was really the smallest and least consequential, which is what Peter Navarro, Trump's trade guy who helped, was one of the co-conspirators on this thing, came out and said last week. He said, if those guys hadn't done the violence, and if Mike Pence had just gone along with our plan and said, we're going to throw this election back to the House of Representatives or back to the states via the House of Representatives, if Pence had simply done that, there wouldn't have been any need for violence, and Trump would have continued to be president. And by the way, Peter Navarro was right. It would have been a crime. It would have been the end of democracy in America. It would have been overthrowing a democratically decided election, small d democratic, in our small r republic. But the violence wasn't necessary if Pence had been willing to play his role, if Brad Raffensperger down in Georgia had been willing to find Donald his 11,478 votes or whatever it was, if the Secretary this was just in one county in Michigan, if this one guy had been willing to say, yeah, we'll throw out the votes in the black areas, which was basically what was being requested of him, Wayne County, parts of Oakland County. If that had happened, I mean, we were within 5 or 6 people of ending our republic and turning America into a neo-fascist dictator run by Donald Trump and a band of people around him who have not only no embrace of democracy, but, Paul Manafort, Trump's first campaign manager, was the front man for right-wing oligarchs after the fall of the Soviet Union. He was the guy who helped keep dictators in power in Eastern Europe. And probably a direct line to the Kremlin. But, I mean, just what he did that we know about, that's all public, the millions and millions of dollars he made advising dictators in countries that were supposed to be democracies, that Gorbachev let them go so they could have democratic elections. And then consultants like Manafort come in and say, well, here's how to have your elections and keep your dictator too. And Roger Stone, the guy who engineered the Stop the Steal in 2000 in Florida, and then came up with Stop the Steal for 2016 when they all believed that Hillary Clinton was going to be crowned president or, was going to win the election. and you know, they had it ready to go. They were going to do the stop the steal right from the get-go. Trump had already said he would not, and this is the great warning, and Jake Tapper pointed this out last night on CNN, was that in 2016, in the primaries in 2015, Donald Trump was saying, if I lose, it's because the election is rigged. I will not accept Hillary Clinton as president. I will not accept another Republican candidate having won. I mean, he started out with the big lie. It's not like something he pulled out of his hat at the last minute after he lost the election. This is a 5-year plan. And what astonished me was, I mean, you know, Jake Tapper is also the guy who is regularly having politicians on and asking them questions on CNN. And, I mean, he just laid this out so clearly. And it's all, you know, it's stuff that we now know from some really good reporting and from some really good investigating by the January 6th Commission. You know, sadly, we don't know any of this from a special prosecutor or from the Department of Justice, which, frankly, in my opinion, is where most of it should be coming from. But nonetheless, we're figuring this out, that there was a plan to end democracy in the United States, that plan started in 2015, that it was supported by foreign oligarchs, that they helped install their man, Paul Manafort, in place to make it happen. He didn't even take a paycheck from Trump. This is a guy who you know, won't do anything without being paid for it. And Trump pardoned him, so he's beyond the reach of the law. And Robert Stone and Steve Bannon and his role in all this. So the question that this raised in my mind, and I put this to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is, A, do you think that the average American is figuring out, and I paused there for a moment because probably average American is not, you know, I think we have to slice and dice this a little more finely. Obviously, politically aware Democrats have figured this out already. Anybody who listens to this show knows, you know, has known for a year, has known for 2 years. I wrote a book about this, you know, the hidden history of American oligarchy, about the rise of Trump and where it was going, or where it could go. So I think Democrats have got this figured out. But you still have 70% of Republicans who think that Trump actually won the election. They're believing the lie. And you've got somewhere in the neighborhood of half of Republicans, a little less than half of Republicans, who think that violence is an acceptable way to settle political disputes. When it becomes obvious, and I believe this is going to happen in the next few weeks, when the January 6th committee begins holding public hearings, when it becomes obvious in ways that even Fox can't ignore anymore, dream on, right? But we'll see, that Donald Trump and his friends were not just trying to, you know, have power for power's sake, not just, I, Claudius, I'm president, isn't that cool? It wasn't just that. That these guys actually had in mind the idea that democracy is a pain in the ass. And that they are being funded by right-wing billionaires who have held that notion since the 1950s, since the Brown versus Board of Education decision, when they started funding the John Birch Society. That democracy is a pain in the ass because, hey, it lets those black people vote, it lets poor people vote, it lets working class people vote, and they're not going to vote the interests of the billionaires. They're not going to vote the interests of the very wealthy. Democracy is a bad idea. I mean, you've got people right now, Republicans and talk show hosts, who are saying letting women vote was a mistake. They obviously believe letting black people vote and Hispanic people vote and Asian people vote, Native American people vote was also a mistake. They don't say that quite in those terms, but you know, it doesn't take any great insight to understand that that's really their message. And that's what they're doing. And this was another point that was made, you know, on CNN last night. is that, over several hundred laws, dozens of which have been passed in now, I think, 8 or 9 states, giving the state legislatures basically the ability to ignore the outcome of elections. Republicans can just say, hey, we're in charge, we're going to stay in charge. Tough luck, everybody. And we're going to put Donald Trump in charge. Do you think that as this dawns on people, there will be a movement pushing back? In other words, will these voter suppression efforts and this big lie work to the benefit of Republicans in the 2022 and 2024 election? Or is it possible that we have hit the turning point where Trump's lies and the utter, craven, groveling, pathetic Ted Cruz to doughboy on Fox News kind of stuff is viewed by Americans as something that really is inconsistent with the American way? It is not how we do business. It's not how we do politics. Do you think that people are getting that, or that they will get that? I am in some ways optimistic. The Germans did not have an Adolf Hitler to look back at and say, holy cow, we don't want to go down this road again. In Germany, prior to January of 1933, before Hitler was made chancellor, there was no news agency in Germany that could have put together the specials that I saw on CNN last night to warn the people. We now have that benefit of hindsight with Hitler, and Fareed Zakaria came right out and said, Trump is no Hitler, but he's using the same strategy to end democracy. Are people waking up? Are the people you know waking up? I'm not seeing it on Twitter, but, Twitter's a kind of weird little slice of social media. I'm holding judgment.